Good evening, everyone. I'm Lynn Pike DeSanto from the Capital Region Council of Governments. I'm in the Policy and Planning section of CROG, as we're called. And this is Bill Perkins. Bill is in the Public Safety section of CROG. And we have both been working on an update to the Capital Region's Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. And if you're not aware, the Capital Region is it consists of the 30 municipalities in north central Connecticut. It is centered on the city of Hartford and 29 surrounding suburbs. And Bill will give you the rundown on what the plan is involved with.
Okay, we'll get started. As the cover denotes, this plan will be good from 2013 to 2018. The plan is good for 5 years once it's adopted, and we'll go over the adoption process as part of the presentation. Why do we need to develop a natural hazard mitigation plan? First, we got to understand what mitigation means in reference to the plan. It means sustained actions that are going to be taken to reduce or eliminate long-term risk to life and property from hazards. And the hazards we're talking about are natural hazards. To improve the region's ability to deal with natural disasters and reduce losses. And the way we do that is to the towns to identify their natural hazards and mitigation processes individually, and then collectively the region is stronger for that. One of the benefits of mitigation actions are it helps reduce the need for emergency response to natural disasters. It can't eliminate it. We're always going to need first responders, police, fire, and EMS. But what it will do is by identifying those mitigation factors that can be taken care of prior to the disaster, it will leave the first responders available for the serious incidents that need to be responded to. Their time won't be taken up with pumping out a cellar that may have an inch or two of water when a tree's come down and there are power lines down and people are injured, that type of thing. So once those are identified, it will reduce it. And as you know, anytime that an alarm goes off and either the police or fire respond, there's an inherent hazard, both getting there and once they're there. It's part of their job. Formal adoption of a regional hazard mitigation plan enables the municipalities access to FEMA hazard mitigation assistance grants. Now, there are a number of grants out there that are funded through different, different means. One of the main means of funding is if there's a declared disaster, whatever monies from the federal government are pushed towards the disaster, a percentage of that money goes into a mitigation fund so that the towns can access that for mitigation type actions. And then lastly, and probably most importantly to the town CEOs, is to improve the post-disaster recovery, to get the town back to the way it was before disaster happened, quickly and as efficiently as possible. They don't want to have to wait 14 days like we did in Alfred. By identifying some mitigation things, maybe cut that down so that we're without power 1, 2, 3 days, a week at the most, but not a long period of time. Not to say that that's not going to happen based on the severity of the disaster, but it helps improve that process. How we got here. So almost 2 years ago now, we put together a planning committee. The committee was made up of all 30 communities, representatives of all 30 communities, the staff of the Capital Region Council of Governments. Within the Capital Region Council of Governments is the Capital Region Emergency Planning Committee, and it has regional emergency support functions. Function 5 is emergency management. They were a part of this process. And then those towns, their CEOs, planners, police and fire chiefs, emergency managers, public works department directors, and their administrative staff were integral in getting this plan put together. Without them, we couldn't have done it. The planning process. What we did was we researched, we did a hazard analysis, not as you think it, but we identified the hazards that needed to be addressed, and we sat down with each one of the municipalities and talked about the 8 identified hazards, which I'll go over momentarily, and how they affected each one of the communities. And then as the discussion went along, we finally figured out how maybe some mitigation actions would lessen the impact of those hazards. And we developed strategies for addressing the hazards. We held meetings. We held not only the meetings with the municipalities, the 30 municipalities, but we had sub-regional meetings where we clumped the municipalities together and put word out to their communities to come and kind of give us their point of view on what they felt was their concerns about the natural hazards. And there were 6 of those throughout the capital region. Then we got together with all the input from the public, the communities, research that both Lynn and I had done, and we have now a draft document to be submitted as not only the regional plan, but also the plan for the 30 communities that make up the region. To assess our risks from the natural hazards, we used a number of different methods to gather data. One is the internet. It's a wonderful thing. You can get a lot of information. Another are different organizations that are very integral in disaster management. And one of them is the National Flood Insurance Program. Anybody that has flooding problems, that has flood insurance, knows about the National Flood Insurance Program. Their insurance is probably funded through that or put forward through that. Basically what that is they keep track of all of the claims for flood since 1978. So they have a pretty good history of where they are and what they've paid out. And I'll talk a little bit more about that momentarily. The other one is documented municipal costs. The state was very helpful. The Division of Emergency Management, Homeland Security, gave us a lot of information as far as the emergency declarations that we've had over the past couple of years. The ones that we reference in the plan are the ones that happened in 2011, Storm Alfred and Irene, as well as the 2011 snowstorms, which caused a number of building collapses. And I'll talk a little bit more about those momentarily also. But we did use them, as well as the State Office of Policy and Management, to get some of the data that we needed. One of the things that we use, and we'll talk about a little bit in the presentation, is a software program. It's a predictability program, which is called HAZUS MH for multi-hazard. And what this does is it takes a hazard, and the 3 that we used were hurricane, flooding, and earthquakes. And based on the data that's in there, that's been input by the federal government, we can do a predictability as to the monetary cost, how much damage, what kind of debris we have from different natural hazards. And like I said, we'll talk a little bit more about that when I actually get into the natural hazards. And then lastly, population and physical data. The population we got from the 2010 census, and physical data we retrieved from OPM as far as
Policy and Management and the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection.
In June, July, almost 2 years ago, when the 1 year ago, we got the committee together and we sat them down and said, write down those natural hazards that affect your community. And what we did was, after they did that, we made a matrix and put the list together. These are the same 8 hazards that were in the previous plan. There are other hazards, but they don't affect us. One of the hazards that the state has that we don't have in our plan is storm surge or tsunami, because we're inland group. So if we have to worry about that, there's a whole lot of other people that have bigger problems than we have. But these are the 8 that were identified. Then what we asked that committee was to prioritize the top 3 most important, or the highest hazards for their communities. And again, we put the list together and created a matrix to find out the average of what the top 3 hazards were. And this is what they came up with. Number 1 was flooding. A majority of the communities, flooding was their top priority. Not all of them, but most of them. The second one was hurricane. And again, when we talk about hurricanes, the thing with hurricanes is flooding, as well as the wind that is created by the hurricane. And then third was severe winter storms. But I will tell you that tornado and high winds was a very close fourth. And I think what has happened to us in the last 3-4 years had a big impact on how we prioritized those hazards. I think if we were to do it now, I think tornado might have beat out winter storm, depending on what town you're in. But those are what we came up with. Now we're going to talk a little bit about each one of them. Number one on the list was flooding. Like I said earlier, not every community flooding was an issue. Some of the higher elevation communities, flooding was not an issue to them. Their thing is they're higher, water runs downhill. The people in the valleys are the ones that have a lot of the issues with flooding. Every year, maybe twice a year, the rivers go over their banks, the brooks go over their banks, and it becomes a very big problem. The problem is that the storms that we're getting now are more and more severe. We're dumping a lot more rain during what we would think was a normal rainstorm than what we've been used to. So it's causing a lot more flooding. So there's more frequency of occurrence. Can be severe at times, and a lot of times if the rivers or the brooks run their banks and gets into buildings and whatnot, it can be severe. Because of that, it becomes a major risk not only for our region, but also on the state plan. What this slide depicts is, I talked about the flood insurance claim, the National Flood Insurance Program. This graphic shows the payout for all flood claims since February of 2012. And the darker the color, the higher the payout. The bigger the circle, the more claims that were filed. Now these are claims that were filed for all of the documented flood claims that were turned in through February of 2012. The next slide shows what they call a repetitive flood loss. And what a repetitive flood loss is that any building, insurable building, that has a monetary loss of $1,000 or more and has two occurrences that are separated by that aren't separated by more than 10 days apart is what they consider a repetitive flood loss. And again, the darker the color, the more repetitive flood losses they have. The bigger the circle, the more claims that have been documented. As you can see for Enfield, they're shaded a little bit, so they do have some repetitive flood issues. One of the requirements of the grant to develop the plan this time is that every town that had a repetitive flood loss had to take and come up with some sort of mitigation action for those repetitive losses in their plan. Hurricane. When was the last time that we actually had a hurricane in Connecticut?
Trick question.
It's a trick question.
Hurricane in Connecticut.
That hit Connecticut. A hurricane. Didn't know you had to study for this meeting, did you?
Go ahead, tell us.
Gloria. Gloria was the last categorized named hurricane that was actually a hurricane when it hit Connecticut. All the rest of them, Irene, Sandy, all of the storms after Gloria and prior to now were all tropical storms when they hit the coastline. So what we did, and we talk about the HAZES modeling program here, what the program is modeled after is the 1938 Category 3 hurricane. Because after Irene and after Sandy, there was a big concern about what would happen if Connecticut actually had another Category 3 hurricane hit Connecticut as a Category 3 hurricane. So what we did was, for the towns, we did a predictability model of what would happen if a Category 3 hurricane hit your town as well as the region. One of the things that came out of the two-storm panel after Irene and Alfred was the debris cleanup. And one of the things that this predictability model does is predicts the amount of debris in tons that would be caused as a result of a Category 3 hurricane. And one of the mentions in that report was that I think somewhere around 80, 75, 80% of the foliage in Connecticut would be affected if we had a Category 3 hurricane rip across the state of Connecticut. And we can remember what happened when we were in Irene and Alfred, and that was only a small, minute portion of the foliage that was down. So it is of great concern. Because of that, the state plan rates it as the most destructive risk because of the area that it covers. The hurricane can cover the entire state of Connecticut. The next one is winter storms or ice storms. We haven't had an ice storm in some time, but we have had a few excuse me, small snowstorms. Everybody remembers the blizzard of 2013. And then there was Storm Alfred, which was our trick or treat. We are New Englanders. We are used to snow. However, we are not used to not having some sort of down period in between snowstorms to be able to clean up. And that's what happened in February of 2011. We had repetitive snowstorms, we had a melt, we had a freeze, and then it snowed again without enough room in between for us to clean up after the snow. And as a result of that, we had a number of buildings within the state have their roofs collapsed down on them. Alfred came early. It was an early snowstorm before the leaves had a chance to get off the trees. Because of that, we had a lot of damage. A lot of good things came out of that bad experience as far as how we prepare ourselves now. Some of the stuff, everybody talked about CLNP, we have improvements there. The good thing is hopefully we don't have to check them out. A good snowstorm, whether it's severe or not, affects our economy. Schools close, people that have school-age children that are working have to make arrangements, especially if they can't be by themselves. If we close the roads, that affects everybody in a different way. Because of that, it's defined as a major risk for the region. Tornado or high winds. We have had our share of tornadoes this year. We've had 4 tornadoes since June or July of this year that have actually made ground contact in our region. So it is something that we now have to take and address seriously. We're not Kansas, we don't have them as frequently, but when they do touch down, the potential for damage is significant. We've been very fortunate that our tornadoes have done more in property damage than loss of life. Because of that, they're relatively infrequent. We have deemed those as a moderate risk, even though if one does touch down, the damage potential is very, very high. This slide and map depicts all of the tornadoes that have actually touched down in the state since the 1950s to 1999. And the one for us that is sort of the history maker was the tornado that hit Windsor Locks. That was probably the strongest and longest tornado that we've had in the state of Connecticut. One of the other things that we looked at, even though it's a man-made structure, were dams. There are 533 dams in the region. And the dams are classified by the Department of Energy and Environmental Protection in classes. A Class C dam is a high danger dam. By means that if that dam were to have a catastrophic failure, that it would most assuredly cause significant property damage and or death. And we have 38 of those dams within the region. Class B is a significant hazard. Again, if there was a catastrophic breach, it may cause significant damage or may cause loss of life. And then there's a Class A that is low hazard. And if it was the breach, it may cause some damage, but not necessarily any loss of life. So we have a number of those within the state. Like I said earlier, dams are man-made. The result of a dam breach is the natural hazard we're talking about, and that's flooding, the catastrophic flooding of whatever's downstream. Drought. We've had a history of drought in Connecticut from the early 1920s. Straight up through 2013. We've been fortunate that we haven't had any prolonged droughts. Droughts affect those communities that agriculture is a big part of their community, especially if they haven't pre-planned on how they would get water for their for their crops and whatnot if there was a drought condition. The biggest thing with drought is it sets up for the next natural hazard that I'm going to talk about, and that's forest fires. If we just take a look at the United States over the last couple of years, the fires in Texas were preceded by a very long drought within the state of Texas. 2 million acres were burnt in Texas. California, most of their fires are preceded by a long drought. And now what the Midwest is going through is the same thing. There was a lot of fires was preceded by a long drought period. Now Connecticut's been fortunate. We haven't had a long drought period, but in the same vein is burning is a natural function. It gets rid of all of the fuel that is in the woods. And what we have is a setup for a probable problem that has been identified by some of the communities in their plan. And that is that all of the trees from Alfred, Irene, and whatever happened from Sandy have fallen down in the woods and they're there. Alfred and Irene are dry enough to be good burning wood right now. We haven't had any cleanup of that stuff in the forest, so that if a fire were to gain a good foothold in any one of the forests, it would be a major challenge for the resources that we have. Earthquake. We have earthquakes all the time. There are tremors that hit the state a lot. We haven't had a major one since the 1800s that was centered in Moodus. The epicenter was in Moodus, and it was a 7.5 on the Richter scale. We've had a lot of tremors, 1.2, 2.1, that have happened right up until last year. But, you know, unless you're really looking at it or you've got a meter in front of you, we don't feel it. We felt more from the shocks from the one that was outside of Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, and the one that was just outside of Portland, Maine this past year, than we have the ones that actually happened in the state of Connecticut. Because of that, it's a minor risk. Now, we've talked about the hazards. Now what I want to talk about a little bit is the mitigation actions. The things that, when we had the meetings with the towns, they came up with to kind of address those hazards. The first one I want to talk about is public education. And this is done in the form of workshops, training. A lot of the towns have said that they want to take and conduct workshops and training on mitigation actions. What to do to get ready for a natural hazard. You see them now on television to have your go kit, or you have to have X number of gallons of water per person if we know something's going to happen, that type of thing. And a lot of the communities want to do that as informational training or workshops. Prevention is the other thing. And how we do that is in a number of different ways. And I'm going to do this because I want to make sure we hit them all. Prevention is a governmental process. And a lot of the preventive things that I'm going to talk about, CROG as a region are going to assist the communities in doing. One of them is service sharing. And what that is if there is a small community, and there's a number of communities that do it. As you can see by up on the presentation, East Granby, Granby, Heartland, Suffield have an MOU to service share building officials because they don't have a big enough town budget to have a person dedicated or a number of people. So what happens in those communities is that if they have something where they need assistance, they already have an agreement on the books that any one of those towns can draw from any of the other if they need help from a building official. And that includes tax assessors and administrative staff to get things done. The next one we talked about the National Flood Insurance Program. Floodsmart.gov is just one of the websites that you can go on there and learn more about it. But one of the things that a lot of the communities had decided that they wanted to do was be part of this community rating system. Right now there's only one community in the region that is part of that, and that's West Hartford. And basically what the community rating system is it's a standard that the town kind of judges themselves against as far as flood issues go. And the more and more things that they can complete based on that standard, the lower and lower the premium goes for those people within the community. And the one thing, good news, bad news, is that the premiums for flood insurance are going to be going up. It's been on television. There are certain notices that we've been getting that it is going up, and it's going to go up substantially. So anything that a community can do to kind of counteract that is not a bad thing. And then another one is studies and planning. There are a number of communities that are going to undertake studies for a bunch of different things. Floodplain studies, elevation studies for bridges, elevation studies for roads that normally flood. And then the other part of that is once the study's done, to develop some sort of planning process to see how they can make that happen. Some of the other things under prevention is the International Building Code. We talked about earthquakes. One of the things that would address earthquakes is the International Building Code, because in there are codes that state if a building's over so many stories, it has to have seismic bracing, as well as other code compliance things that we have to do to make ourselves safer, and so act as a mitigation process. Another one is regulations and ordinances. All towns have zoning regulations or town ordinances as to, how you build, where you can build. You can't build in a floodplain, that type of thing. And that is something that a lot of the communities are going to take, and they're going to review them, update them, and see if they need to be expanded or are good just as they are. But a review of those. Natural resource protection, and I talked about this a little bit when I talked about the forest fires. What this is taking and mitigating certain hazards, and this one here would be forest fire hazards, as well as drainage issues, erosion issues, through natural means. A way of mitigation that isn't going to upset the natural balance of things. And this one here is forest management planning. A number of the communities that we had talked to, and they put it in their plan, that have large expanses of forest want to take and develop or look at, if they have, their forestry management plan to see how they can address the fuel load and what would happen should they have an issue within their forested areas. The other one is what they call a low impact development plan. And this is sort of the green of hazard mitigation. How can we mitigate things and still keep it on a low impact green earth type issue? And there, I have a couple more examples of that. Town of Tolland has instituted a low impact development and stormwater management design manual. And it can be as simple as, if you've got a parking lot, instead of having it all asphalt with a storm drain to catch all the water, put some planters in the middle of it. Put some grass in the middle of it. What we want to do is we want that water to go back into the substrate, back into the soil, so that it can be reused again, instead of being collected in a stormwater drain and pushed out to the river. And then this is one of the things that the Capital Region, as a regional entity, can help in. We have a number of initiatives that we're working on regionally to assist the communities in doing that. Structural projects and property protection. These are the things that we'll physically do to protect structures. One of them is called acquisition. Acquisition is where a community identifies a building that is in a floodplain and is consistently flooded. There are a lot of claims of flooding, and through the cooperation of the town and the owner of the property, have decided that the town will acquire that property. They'll buy it at fair market value. And then what the town would do was take down that property and leave it as a floodplain. There are a lot of things that has to happen to have this work. It can work though. Was it Plainville just did 13 properties?
13, they got grant funding from FEMA and support from the state also to purchase 13 homes that were built in, I think, the 1950s or, some time ago, that were located in a floodplain. And so the people will be moving out, and they'll take the houses down and use the land as open space. It's a long and complicated process, but it can work to everyone's benefit, but really you have to have community cooperation for that.
That, as well as the town has to set aside funds for that, because even though there is grant money out there, it's a 25-75 grant split. The federal government will come up with 75% of the money, but the town, through bonding or however they're going to do it, has to come up with 25% of what the cost is. Another alternative would be to move that house. It doesn't happen unless it's of extreme historical significance, because it's extremely expensive and logistically very difficult to do, to move a structure from one point to another. Another one is culverts and storm drains. A lot of the communities have identified this as a mitigation action, that they're going to take and take a look at their storm drains in those areas that they know are problems. And there's only one or two things that cause that. That the drains that are in there were put in when there was a lot less water coming down, so that the drain itself is insufficient. So that requires a construction project to dig it up, put a larger drain in there. Or in this case, this was a washout as a result of flooding, and they put a new storm drain in underneath the road, and they armored both sides of the bank so that it wouldn't wash out if it were to have a flooding situation again. Some more structural projects. This is one that is happening, and a lot of the towns are making availability of it. It's critical infrastructure protection in the process of buying generators. Generators were never considered a mitigation issue until November of last year, where the federal government said it is now okay for communities to purchase generators for critical infrastructure buildings, and there's a list of those buildings that they consider critical infrastructure. Town hall, police department, fire department, shelters, sewage treatment plants, the things that keep your infrastructure running. So there are a lot of communities that are actually in the process or have gone through the process of writing grant applications for generators. The next one is what they call elevation. This is floodproofing. This actually is the boathouse along the Connecticut River. Now, I will tell you that that wasn't done as a reason that it's done. When they put that together, whoever planned ahead and realized that the river was going to flood, that first section up to where the balcony is all open, concrete, reinforced basement. So that when the river floods, they keep the sculls in there, the boats. That when the river floods, they have another location for them. They pull everything out of the basement, and the water can come up, fill up the basement. When it recedes, the water runs out, and no harm, no foul. The next one is floodproofing. If you have a residence that is consistently flooded with water, one of the ways to floodproof is to elevate all of those things that could be damaged by flooding. Here they're showing what a 60-gallon hot water heater would look like elevated up off of a cellar floor above what the flood level would be. Now you can do this with that, you can do it with a burner, you can do it with your electrical. That's how you would floodproof. The other part of that would be some sort of sump pump or way to evacuate the water. So it's a two-part process. Emergency preparedness. Emergency preparedness isn't necessarily a mitigation action, but there are a lot of things that we can do in preparedness that kind of goes in that direction. And one of them is a lot of the community said that they wanted to take and maintain or continue to follow the National Incident Management System. And by that they mean the Incident Command System. All of the first responders and a lot of the communities, if they open up their emergency operations centers, uses the incident command system as their command structure model. The reason for that is everybody knows it, so that if people were coming to help, it's integrated seamlessly. Everybody knows what everybody else is talking about. So a lot of communities, they put that as a preparedness mitigation. The next one is to develop and maintain enhanced working relationships with whoever they identify that they need to. Here we're using tree contractors because it's such an issue. A lot of communities are getting into MOUs or agreements with their local tree companies that they want to be top on the list if something happens, and they need to make a phone call and say, we need you to come and work with the power company to clear our highways, our roadways, or whatever, so that a tree crew is already assigned. They already have that agreement in place. Now that stands true for a lot of different things, whether it's the power company, the gas company, the phone company. All those things were identified as issues that some of the communities were going to take and develop that working relationship. Communication, enhancing public alerting capabilities was another one that a number of the communities said that they were going to do. They all realized that they need to be able to get the word out to the residents within their community. A lot of communities have that capability already. Some of them don't. Some of them realize they want to enhance it. Everybody has CT alert, but a lot of the communities want to take and be able to modularize their alerting system so that they can just send it to a specific area instead of everybody. So they're going to be doing a lot of communities are going to be looking to either enhancing what they have or looking into getting something for public alerting. The other is shelters, increased shelter capabilities and supplies. A number of communities have identified that the one community center or the school that they have, when you have a major outage or townwide outage that lasts 14 days is inadequate. There's just not enough space in high school auditorium. So they were looking to having a second or a third shelter capability that they can open up. So that, and have the supplies, the cots, the pillows. The biggest thing that we found regionally coordinating a lot of this stuff was personnel. You have the same group of people that are there all the time to be in the shelters to run them, and you can't hold them there for 14 days. So what a lot of towns did, or some of the towns, recognized that they want to develop community emergency response teams, CERT teams, so that they have an organized group of people that they can just plug into that. And a lot of towns already have them, and they worked out wonderfully. What this is that just a quick breakdown of what the communities are doing. After it was all said and done, there's some 400 mitigation actions that the regional communities are going to try to accomplish over the next 5 years. Most of the towns are undertaking the education and public awareness part of the mitigation in the form of outreach or targeted outreach. And by targeted outreach, what I mean is reaching out to those areas in their towns that they know has the elderly, functional needs, whether they be physical or psychological, or someone that just doesn't understand English. The important thing is that everybody gets notified and everybody is kept track of so that nobody gets left behind. As well as preparedness and emergency response, and a number of them are doing prevention and structural improvement projects. But there are some 400 mitigation actions that are contained within this plan. One of the regional goals that Capital Region is going to try to assist in is to minimize the loss of life and property and the economic disruptions that can result from natural hazards. And we have objectives to do that. Our first objective is to improve the stormwater management and groundwater recharge throughout the region to prevent increased flooding and lessen effects of drought. We're doing this through informational processes. You saw that when we were talking about the green, the low impact development. Well, there are guides and whatnot that we have access to, and we put out regionally to the communities that will help them do that. Assist the municipalities in implementing the hazard mitigation strategies. There are some things that we can do, and there are things that we can't do. The things that we can do is we can take and support the community any way they need. We can do a lot of research. We will notify you when grants are available. We will take and write a white paper for you or whatever that. What we can't do. We can't pass or create laws or regulations, ordinances. We can't levy taxes. And we cannot enter into an agreement for construction. Those are the community's responsibilities. But other than that, we're here to help. Assist municipalities in minimizing the risks associated with power disruptions. One way that we're doing that regionally is that after Irene and Alfred and Sandy, the state created a emergency support function 12, which is utilities. And the capital region has a seat at that table, along with the power companies, both of them, the cell providers, the gas company, television providers, and what they're charged with is to think about how they can make things better. And we've come a long way with that. And regionally, we have a voice there. And then number 4 is to assist municipalities in minimizing their risks associated with droughts. This comes through workshops, manuals, modeling. So we have that capability to assist the municipalities if that's the direction that they're going. How we got to develop the objectives was we came up with the idea. The town came up with how they wanted to approach it, and then what we did is we gave them this method. It's called the stapling method. And what it is just you hold what you want to do against this method. And basically what you had to ask yourself, what I want to do as a mitigation action, is it socially acceptable? Am I going to run into problems with it or not? Technically, can we technically pull it off? Do I have the staff? Do I have the means to do it? Administratively, can we get it done administratively? What type of things, what administrative staff am I going to have to marry to this in order to get it done through completion? Is it politically correct? Is there going to be some sort of political fallout by wanting to do this? Legal. Is it legal for us as a community to do this? Is it legally feasible? Economically, is it cost effective? One of the things, and we'll talk about it a little bit, is that we had to do a cost benefit analysis.
Benefit
Review.
Benefit cost review.
To find out where these objectives or the strategies sat as either a low, a medium, or high. You have to do that also with your plans or with your strategies. And then environmentally, is it going to be environmentally sound, or are we just going to exacerbate a problem? You know, fix one problem but create another. This is where we're at right now. The plan is substantially complete. It's some 400 pages of writing and some another 400 pages of appendices of graphs, pictures, a whole bunch of other stuff. It can be found on the CROG website. I'll give you the URL address in a minute. But we presented the draft plan to our planning committee as well as our policy board. And the planning committee voted to take and put it out to public comment, which is why we're here tonight. Once we finish up with the meeting tonight, Lynn and I are going to go and there's a public comment period that is open until October 11th. And we will take and address any public comments that we get and make the adjustments to the plan as needed so that we can take and submit the plan. The plan is going to go to the Department of Emergency Service and Public Protection for review. And what they're going to do is make sure that we met the needs of the grant that paid for all of this to happen. If we did our job right and there's no problems, they will accept it and forward it to the federal government, FEMA, in Region 1 up in Boston. they will take and review it also for content. Since they wrote the grant and they're the ones that came up with the standards, they will check it against what they consider as acceptable. If it passes, then we will get correspondence expense. If it doesn't, they're going to send it back and tell us what we need to fix. But if it passes, we will get a letter from FEMA of,
Approval pending adoption, it's a conditional approval.
then what happens is we'll all come back and we have to have a number of organizations adopt it. The policy board for CROG to adopt it as a regional plan. Then each one of the communities, through however they would go through to approve a resolution, has to do it for their community. And then once we get all 30 of those communities done, we actually have a plan, an adopted plan, which is good for the next 5 years. Once we have that, the plan is going to be attached to the Regional Emergency Support Plan, the RESP, as an annex for natural hazard mitigation. If you want to take and read the entire plan, it's at the CROG website. And actually, you don't need the whole thing. If you just go to www.crog.org, right on that front page, if you scroll down, you'll see Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. And just to remember that the public comment will close on October 11th. So if you happen to be talking to anybody and they said, oh, I missed the meeting, but I really wanted to inject something, have them get something to Lynn or I, and we will review it and put it in a plan if it warrants it. Any questions? Thank you for coming. That's all I have.
No questions?
No questions?
Oh, I can come up with a few while everybody else is thinking of theirs.
There you go. I like questions.
Yeah, I'm new to town, so has there been a larger kind of group gathering at some point around this conversation?
You're new to Enfield?
I am new to Enfield, yes.
Yes, we had a series of public meetings this summer. I think Bill mentioned throughout the region to gather input.
But here in Enfield?
In Windsor Locks, we had Enfield, Windsor Locks,
yeah,
and
okay.
the meeting. So it was just across the river. There was a meeting in Enfield of primarily the municipal officials early on to kick off the meeting. We've had meetings really since the beginning in various venues and all, but
You have another question?
Oh, I have 4 or 5, but I don't want to. Let's go around and have everybody ask a question.
I already mentioned to the town mayor here. I think he should carry the ball. That's why we have the town mayor.
Yes.
So go ahead. It's your floor.
That's a little intimidating. I'm interested in the low impact development.
Okay.
Interested. I see that there is a guidance document from another town generally on how to do it, but are there standards for how much to do, when to do? I know in some places there are trade-offs around, sometimes it makes sense, sometimes you need to harden, there are really engineering issues in that.
And that would be part of it is that if a community wanted to do something with a low impact development,
Yep.
they would have to go in and, depending on what the project was, have to do some sort of a feasibility study. And there are documents that are guidance
Yeah, so
for,
there's guidance within the plan about
Right.
when, how, and
well,
standards.
not directly,
Well, not in this plan, no.
this plan, but
Okay.
CROG has a number of documents that can give the communities some, assistance. But in a lot of cases, for some of the low impact developments, the community's going to have to perhaps change, in some cases, perhaps their zoning regulations with regard to erosion and sediment controls, so that they do allow things like permeable pavements and all of that. And they may need to come up with new engineering design standards to allow for it too. So it is a process that they would go through, but some of the communities have done that. They've looked at their existing regulations and they've looked at how they can green them, you know, but
Right, that's the source of my question. Have we done that yet? In our land use communities or anything else?
Well, we just had the plan of conservation and development approved probably 2 years ago. So, but I don't know if there was low impact items in there, I'm not positive.
Yeah, does it have a lot of detail in that plan?
It's huge, it's probably that thick.
Okay, I'd like to see that. Great, thank
I
you.
believe you can get it right off the town's website, under the planning department.
Okay, I just realized that.
Actually, you can. I got it off the website.
Yes?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Come on.
I mean, the other area I'm interested in is just, you know, I see the mention in your draft, in your summary, of public information.
Yes.
You know, pushing information about emergencies out to the public. And I, you know, while I call myself new, I've been hovering for a while. So I was here during the winter snowstorm a year and a half ago. And I saw, you know, the Enfield alerts, very well organized system, basic information. But I still wonder what has been done and what our communities around the region doing, a kind of higher level of really helping the citizens understand what goes into an emergency response, how they can get more involved, you know, how they can look after their neighbors, be prepared, you know, not just like where they can plug in their cell phone the day after the storm, but just like, you know, there's more to it than that.
It differs from community to community.
Uh-huh.
Some are very robust, some are not so.
Which would you think most from your travels?
Excuse me?
From your travels, which are the most robust?
I don't want to name names. Some are, some aren't. Regionally,
You for which are lame.
yeah. Regionally,
Yep.
what we've done as a region to assist everybody, not only the region, but it's a public viewing, is the Get Ready Capital Region website. If you go on there, it's this very simple, easy, navigable website that will go on there. You can learn how to prepare for any one of the hazards we talked about, what kits you need to make, how to take and prepare for it, what to do if you get caught in one, and what happens afterwards when you have to deal with the insurance companies and FEMA and stuff like that.
That's a very practical website for individuals and all. You know,
Right,
it's
for individuals who are motivated to go to the website, which is
Right.
one.
Correct.
in
Yeah,
1,000.
it's a good resource that we can direct people to, and some of the towns are saying that they really want to try to work to and get the word out in their town about it, and to, you know, let people know.
Yeah, because I mean, the reason for my question is that here and there around the Northeast, there are towns that are really pushing a lot more awareness and training out into their citizens.
Absolutely. There are some towns that have very robust CERT teams, which
Yeah.
are the Community Emergency Response Teams.
Yeah.
And you know what? It all comes down to economics. Some of the towns have the availability of people and staff to do that, so it becomes part of their town function. And there are other smaller towns that just don't have that capability. So what happens is some of the lesser fortunate towns are, their people are going to the ones that have the CERT teams. And it's state of Connecticut has a statewide mutual aid agreement. And basically, if something happens in one community that has a CERT team and it happens in the community that doesn't, that community that has a CERT team is going to go and help out. As far as getting the word out more, what a lot of towns do is when they send out like the tax notices and stuff, a little bad news and good news. The bad news is you get your taxes. The good news is there may be an informational brochure in there on how to access, you know, a emergency preparedness website or what the town or how they're doing it. A lot of towns have done that to get the word out to their people. You're welcome. Any other questions? Well, if there are none, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.